She stepped inside in complete silence. No fanfare, no entourage, just a calm, resolute gaze, powerful enough to make them uncomfortable. They didn't care what her name was. They merely glanced at her simple attire, exchanged disdainful looks behind forced polite smiles, and gently asked her to leave. Judged, dismissed, treated as unworthy. Yet she didn't respond with anger or raise her voice. She simply stood her ground and watched their arrogance crumble. What happens when the woman you've just scorned turns out to be the one holding your fate in her hands? This isn't merely a story about prejudice or social standing. It's about the hidden corners of the human soul that reveal themselves when people believe no one's watching. Melissa Warren, the powerful CEO who owns over half the shares in the very Fairline Hotel before her, yet rarely appears in public. She paused for a moment before the broad glass doors, her eyes tracing the high-rise she helped build. Pride of ownership shone there, mingled with a deep, unplaceable sadness, an inkling that something significant was about to unfold. She inhaled deeply, then strolled toward the entrance as if she were the most ordinary guest visiting on a quiet evening. When the automatic doors glided open, the soft, sophisticated strains of jazz from the lobby slipped in to greet her. The Fairline's lobby was impeccably designed, luxurious yet inviting. Gleaming marble floors, perfectly arranged deep blue velvet sofas, and a small fireplace in the corner crackling with comforting warmth. Melissa smiled faintly, noting that every detail remained exactly as she had once approved. But as she ventured deeper, she sensed something amiss. Probing gazes, skeptical glances converging on her. A few reception staff whispered among themselves, their looks laced with irritation and contempt. She recognized that familiar attitude, one she'd faced for years, despite her efforts to change it. There was no hurry in her steps. She approached the reception desk with steady, unhurried confidence. She knew that same confidence would unset Leatham, that they'd begun to judge her as an unwelcome stranger in this refined space. Melissa felt neither rage nor shock. She simply wanted to confirm what she'd long suspected, that the outward grandeur she'd painstakingly created could never fully erase the biases buried beneath. As she neared the counter, she gently placed her hand on the polished wood. The young clerk behind the desk, Dylan Evans, looked up at her with cold irritation. He had no idea that this unassuming woman was the owner of the very place where he worked. An unspoken confrontation began in the hush of the lobby, between her authority and their ingrained prejudices. Her voice was soft but unwavering. "Good evening. I have a suite reservation. My name is Melissa Warren." She needed say no more. That single sentence sent a ripple of tension through every corner of the Fairline's lobby, because tonight a great challenge would begin, one that would expose the true character of the people working here, all unaware that the one they'd dismissed held their livelihood in her hands. Melissa maintained her confident posture as she slowly stepped closer to the reception desk. Her gaze quietly studied the young clerk behind the counter, Dylan Evans. He was dressed in a sharp suit, a navy blazer fitted snugly over broad shoulders, his blonde hair meticulously slicked back with gel. Dylan had always taken pride in his appearance, and his knack for sizing up guests within seconds of their arrival. To him, the Fairline Hotel was more than just a job. It was a symbol of status and an upscale lifestyle. Because of that, Dylan was certain he was never wrong judging someone by their looks. Until tonight. When Melissa gently rested her hand on the polished wood countertop, Dylan barely glanced up before returning to his computer screen, his fingers tapping away with careless efficiency. His cold indifference was so blatant it bordered on rude. A woman in a simple hoodie arriving at this hour, Those few details were enough for him to dismiss her as unworthy of the hotel's luxury. "Good evening," Melissa said softly. "I have a suite reservation. My name is Melissa Warren." Dylan remained unmoved, his head still tilted toward the monitor, one eyebrow deliberately raised. After several reluctant seconds of searching, he shrugged and replied in a flat tone, without a hint of hesitation, "I'm sorry, but there's no reservation under that name." Melissa stayed calm, her voice gentle but a touch firmer. "Please check again. It might be under Rowan Hospitality Group, Suite 1701. At that, Dylan paused for the first time and looked her directly in the eye. But his gaze held no respect, only suspicion and a faint mocking smile. He shook his head. "Suite 1701 is reserved exclusively for our corporate VIPs and senior executives, not for unexpected walk-ins." Melissa recognized the implication instantly, but she showed no anger. She simply replied, still composed, "I understand. That's the policy I put in place. I'm the CEO of Rowan Hospitality Group. If you look at the internal notes, you'll see that." Dylan fell silent for a moment before letting out a derisive chuckle that sliced through the lobby's refined ambiance. With a deliberately loud tone so others could hear, he said, "You're the CEO? Sorry, but we've dealt with plenty of imposters claiming special privileges. I'm sure you understand." Then, without a second thought, Dylan pressed the button under the counter to summon security, as if handling such situations were his daily routine. His smirk now radiated pure contempt, as though he was eager to watch Melissa become flustered or angry. Melissa stood unmoving, her eyes locked on Dylan's. She felt not anger, but a profound disappointment. Dylan embodied a generation of overconfident, arrogant staff who believed they had the right to decide who belonged in the very place Melissa built. She realized more clearly than ever that a hotel's outward luxury didn't guarantee a respectful culture. And that was precisely why she had come tonight. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. A tall, broad-shouldered security guard, Tom Reynolds, with a stern look and attentive gaze, appeared in Melissa's line of sight. She drew a quiet breath but held her ground, staring down Dylan as she awaited his next move. Dylan's smug expression grew even more triumphant, convinced that security's arrival validated his authority and his decision. In Dylan's arrogant eyes, a silent but intense showdown had begun. Little did he know that in just a few minutes, his career and his pride would be completely upended, and the unassuming woman before him would be the one to make it happen. The heavy thud of Tom Reynolds' boots stopped just behind Melissa, and at that same moment the sharp click of high heels echoed down the corridor. The sound was swift and decisive, powerful, yet coldly indifferent. From the doorway of the back office strode Linda Foster, the night shift manager. Her golden hair pulled into a tight chignon, her makeup flawless but expression ice-cold. Her keen eyes swept the reception area before locking onto Melissa, as if she'd spotted a strange object out of place. Linda was known for her precision and strict adherence to procedure, but her rigidity often made her seem heartless to the staff. To her, rules and protocols were paramount. People were little more than names in the ledger, guest codes and verification checkboxes, devoid of emotion. That very detachment had earned her the manager's post, but it also created an unbridgeable distance between her and everyone she encountered. "What's going on here, Dylan?" Linda asked evenly, her tone carrying enough authority to make Dylan snap to attention. "This woman claims to be the CEO of Rowan Hospitality," Dylan replied, with a sneer that emphasized CEO, "but I can't find any reservation under her name." Linda turned a cold, appraising stare on Melissa, silently scrutinizing her for several tense seconds. Then, in a voice that brooked no argument, she said, "I'm Linda Foster, night manager of this hotel. Please present your ID so we can verify your identity." Melissa offered her ID and business card without a word, her movement graceful yet unmistakably cooperative. Linda glanced at the documents for less than 2 seconds before returning them with a curt gesture. Not a muscle in her face moved as she said, with barely concealed doubt, "Honestly, you don't look much like a CEO. We've had imposters before. I'm sure you understand. We need more time to verify." Linda's words fell into the lobby's hushed air like an icy stone, creating a suffocating, oppressive silence. Her unwavering gaze was a blade that cut through the calm Melissa had maintained all evening. Linda prided herself on unnerving anyone who crossed her path, believing that overt suspicion would send pretenders running. Melissa was no exception. Melissa met Linda's eyes steadily, her own expression unflinching, though deep disappointment flickered in her mind. Linda Foster embodied exactly what Melissa feared. A manager flawless at enforcing rules, but utterly failing to treat guests as human beings. Linda saw no dignity, only a problem to be removed as swiftly and coldly as possible. Tilting her head slightly, Linda's voice remained steady and authoritative. "Please step aside so we can complete the verification. We'll handle this as quickly as possible." The word "handle" made it clear Melissa was being treated like a nuisance rather than a guest. The tension in the air ratcheted higher, and the surrounding staff now stared with a mix of curiosity and unease. Even Dylan, who still wore a confident facade, betrayed a hint of uncertainty as the situation grew more volatile than he'd anticipated. Melissa remained rooted in place, ignoring Linda's instruction. She spoke softly but clearly, ensuring both Linda and Dylan could hear. "I will stand here and wait for your verification. What matters right now isn't whether I look like a CEO, but how this hotel welcomes and treats everyone who walks through its doors." Linda frowned but offered no reply. She turned and signaled Dylan and the guard to continue watching Melissa closely. Her figure receded into the back office, cold, decisive, and left behind a virtually suffocating atmosphere. Melissa stood tall, her gaze fixed on the office door Linda had just entered. She knew this was only the beginning, a battle not over a simple misunderstanding at the front desk, but a clash between self-respect and deep-seated prejudice, and Melissa was ready, fully aware that this confrontation would be far tougher and longer than anything she'd faced tonight. The instant Linda's cold silhouette disappeared behind the office door, a wave of chill washed over Melissa, as if the hotel's air had suddenly thickened and become suffocating. Melissa glanced to her side, where Tom Reynolds, the towering security guard, had quietly taken up position beside her. Tom was the kind of man whose mere presence could intimidate. Nearly 6.5 feet tall, broad, shouldered, standing rock, solid. His eyes betrayed no emotion, just a steely focus, as if assessing a hidden threat. Tom Reynolds wasn't just any guard. A former Special Forces operative, he spent years in elite security before moving to private protection. He trusted his gut implicitly and treated anyone he was assigned to monitor as a potential danger to be contained. Beside Melissa, he deliberately kept his distance just close enough for her to feel his presence, a silent warning without ever overstepping. He didn't need to speak. His menacing silence said it all. Whenever Melissa shifted even slightly, Tom took a half-step forward, treating her like a dangerous suspect ready to bolt. His unblinking stare never left her, making clear she was being treated as a serious security risk. At that moment, not far from Melissa, A wealthy white couple entered the lobby, dressed impeccably, radiating poise and confidence. The moment they reached the desk, Dylan's entire demeanor flipped. He greeted them with a bright smile, attentive questions, and handed over their room key in under a minute. Melissa watched it all, every courteous word, every friendly gesture, which only underscored the injustice and bias suffocating her. Melissa's hand clenched unconsciously, yet she kept her face calm. This wasn't her first encounter with prejudice, but every time it reopened an old wound. The wound named bias she'd spent years trying to heal, yet still smoldered within as a painful reminder of a stubborn reality. Tom remained a silent statue at her side, his presence a heavy weight pressing against her chest. Each passing second in that oppressive quiet reinforced the truth Loretta, the hotel's longtime janitor, once told her: "You don't need words to hurt someone. Sometimes silence is the cruelest weapon." Lifting her head, Melissa met Tom's unyielding gaze. He didn't waver, his eyes still cold and vigilant, convinced he was doing his duty, a duty backed by Dylan and Linda, two senior staff who had deemed Melissa a potential threat. She glanced once more at the reception desk, where Dylan carried on cheerily with the couple. It felt like a knife twisting in her heart. Dylan's politeness to them, his warm smiles, were the starkest proof of the contempt and unfairness Melissa endured. To them, she was just a plain, clad stranger, a problem unworthy of the slightest respect. In that moment, Melissa realized more clearly than ever that this hotel, part of her legacy and pride, harbored a deep crack. A crack born from the very people she'd entrusted to make it run. And standing amid that silent siege, Melissa knew she could no longer stay quiet. She had to do something to change things, not just for herself, but for everyone else enduring this injustice in silence. Straightening her posture, her eyes blazed with fierce determination. Tom noted the shift. A faint furrow of his brow hinted he wondered what this small woman might do next. But Melissa didn't flinch, didn't protest, didn't lash out. She simply stood her ground in silence, her steady gaze declaring without words. She was not afraid, and she would not back down from any pressure. As the cold silence continued to hang over the lobby like a fog, an elderly woman in the far corner quietly watched it all unfold. That was Loretta Davis, a veteran housekeeper who'd seen every secret drama play out in this hotel. Loretta was slight in stature, her silver hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, her hands lean and strong from years of work. Her eyes held the patience and wisdom of someone used to reading people's hearts in the smallest of gestures. Loretta had stood there for quite a while, mop in hand, missing nothing. Every move by Dylan, Linda, and especially Tom Reynolds. To her, their coldness toward Melissa was all too familiar. She'd witnessed again and again the unspoken prejudice in staff members' glances and words toward guests like Melissa, those who didn't fit the glamorous image the hotel wanted to project. Loretta knew that people like Dylan or Linda didn't see their unfair treatment of Melissa as wrong. To them, it was simply a defense mechanism, a way to protect their fragile status in this fiercely competitive hotel environment. But Loretta also knew that such arrogance and heartlessness would eventually be the noose that choked them when the truth came to light. No one noticed Loretta as she quietly edged closer, pretending to mop a dusty spot near the reception desk. Tom Reynolds stayed looming at Melissa's side. Dylan continued cheerfully serving new arrivals, occasionally sneering at Melissa out of the corner of his eye. Melissa, standing steadfast in their midst, remained composed, but Loretta could see the exhaustion creeping into her eyes. In a brief moment when no one was paying attention, Loretta leaned down as though she were wiping a speck from the floor, and in a voice just loud enough for Melissa to hear, she said, "Just stay right there. they're digging their own grave. Though soft-spoken, her words cut through the tension like a cool breeze soothing a burn. Melissa tilted her head and caught Loretta's gaze, one filled with deep understanding and compassion. In that fleeting instant, the two strangers shared a silent bond, a mutual recognition that needed no words. Melissa gave a slight nod in gratitude for the quiet encouragement. In her eyes, determination now shone alongside profound appreciation for Loretta, the only person who seemed to understand the injustice she was enduring. Loretta straightened and resumed her work as if nothing had happened. Her expression never changed, but inside she felt a quiet pride. For years, Loretta had witnessed silence, silent helplessness, silent self-preservation. But today, she chose to break her own silence, even if only with a few quiet words. Her whisper wasn't just for Melissa. It was a declaration to herself that she would no longer stand by and accept what she knew was unfair. Loretta understood she might lack the power or position to reform the entire system, but she had the right to stand on the side of truth, even if through a small, simple act. Across the lobby, Dylan and Tom still glowered at Melissa with contempt. Linda, having retreated into her office, had not yet returned, leaving the front desk heavy with tension. But Melissa was different now. Loretta's silent support had given her strength, an invisible but powerful force. Melissa resolved not to give them any further excuse to doubt or mock her. She would remain exactly where she stood, patiently waiting for the truth to come out. She believed Loretta was right. It wasn't she who was in jeopardy, but Dylan, Linda, and Tom, whose arrogance and cruelty were slowly burying them. Drawing in a steady breath, Melissa fixed her unwavering gaze ahead. She knew this was only the opening move in a challenging battle, but she no longer stood alone. At her side was Loretta, a seasoned, silent ally who showed her that true strength wasn't in intimidation or threats, but in preserving one's dignity and facing adversity with calm resolve. Melissa's gaze remained fixed straight ahead, unshaken despite the weight of Tom Reynolds' looming presence beside her. Loretta had slipped back to her familiar corner to continue her work, yet her eyes discreetly stayed locked on Melissa, offering a silent but powerful encouragement. That brief moment was enough for Melissa to realize she was no longer alone. She knew it was time to act decisively. Slowly, Melissa reached into her hoodie pocket with a deliberate, cautious motion, careful not to disturb the already tense atmosphere. Tom's sharp eyes immediately honed in on her movement, his brow knitting in suspicion. But Melissa did not waver. She calmly withdrew her sleek, discreet smartphone, unlocked the screen, and dialed a pre-saved number. A simple call, yet one carrying extraordinary weight. As soon as the line connected, Melissa spoke in a soft but authoritative tone, each word deliberate enough for Tom and Dylan to hear clearly. "This is Melissa Warren. I'm activating the Charleston Protocol immediately." Her voice, though gentle, struck like thunder in the lobby's charged hush. Within a second of her announcement, Dylan's smug, confident expression faltered into visible confusion. He cast a quick, anxious glance toward Linda's office door, as if seeking reassurance, but the door remained firmly closed and silent. Even Tom Reynolds, usually unflappable, could not hide a flicker of unease in his steely eyes. His years of security experience told him that events were spiraling beyond his control. He didn't know what the Charleston Protocol entailed, but instinct warned him this was far more serious than any routine upset. Melissa slipped the phone back into her pocket with slow, purposeful movements. She didn't need another word. Her composed silence now shook them most of all. Dylan's casual air was gone. He began to fumble at the keyboard, desperately searching for any record of the Charleston Protocol, but found nothing. This secret procedure lay beyond the reach of an ordinary front desk clerk. The atmosphere at the Fairline Hotel shifted from tense to a silent chaos, an invisible but overwhelming upheaval. Other staff, though not directly involved, noticed the bizarre change in Dylan and Tom. Sideways glances toward Melissa carried shared curiosity. Who was this unassuming woman? And what had she just unleashed to rattle the hotel's two most confident employees? From her station across the room, Loretta carried on tidying, yet a faint spark of hope lit her eyes. She didn't know the details of the protocol Melissa had activated, but she understood that something major was unfolding. Something that would force everyone who had looked down on or oppressed others here to face the consequences of their arrogance and indifference. Melissa stayed cold and composed, fully aware that the real battle was only beginning. The Charleston Protocol was an emergency measure she'd prepared long ago to test the integrity and conduct of staff at her owned properties, especially in cases of discrimination. This secret plan was reserved for the most serious violations, and tonight was one of those rare occasions. Her eyes swept over Dylan and Tom, who now dared not meet her stare. Melissa knew that beneath their veneer of confidence and pride lay growing fear and uncertainty. The truth they believed they controlled was now turning to challenge and threaten them. She exhaled a slow breath, as if releasing a pressure she'd held since entering the hotel. Now she didn't need to speak. The invisible authority she'd asserted through that brief call was already rippling through the Fairline. Melissa knew everything would soon come to light, and when it did, people like Dylan, Tom, and Linda would have to answer for their prejudiced, dismissive actions. In that moment, Melissa quietly lifted her chin, her determined eyes fixed forward, ready for whatever response came from those who had tried to belittle and silence her. They didn't yet grasp the magnitude of their mistake, but Melissa did, and she was prepared to face it all. Just as the tension in the Fairline's lobby reached its peak, the glass doors quietly swung open to reveal an older gentleman entering with slow, measured steps that nonetheless carried a solemn dignity. He wore a well-worn but clean beige coat, his weathered face framed by kind, sorrow-tinged eyes. This was Harold Mitchell, a longtime Charleston resident who had witnessed the city's many ups and downs. The moment he appeared, Melissa's gaze softened and lifted toward him, as if she had been waiting for someone like him all along. Harold approached the reception area deliberately, immediately sensing the charged atmosphere. He took in Melissa's tense expression, the menacing stance of Tom, and Dylan's cold, contemptuous stare. His eyes grew distant as buried memories, ones he'd kept hidden for decades, washed over him. For an instant, Harold seemed to see past the Fairline's glitzy facade to a scene more than 20 years ago. He recalled the first time he'd stepped through these doors, when the hotel was new, elegant, and full of promise. Yet it was here, too, that he'd encountered deep prejudice, a silent humiliation he'd never truly overcome. "I've been here before," Harold said softly but clearly, drawing every eye in the lobby. "Right here, in this very hotel, on a rainy night 20 years ago." His voice carried an uncanny sincerity. Each word cut through the hotel's grandeur like a scalpel. He spoke calmly, yet his words weighed heavily on Dylan and Tom. "At that time, I simply wanted to rent a small room for the night. But they told me the hotel was fully booked, even though I could clearly see room keys hanging at the front desk," Harold continued, his tone dropping, but the emotion behind every word growing stronger. "I stood in this lobby for what felt like hours, under their wary, suspicious looks, feeling powerless and ashamed in a way I've never forgotten." Melissa listened intently, her eyes softening with empathy, while Dylan and Tom felt mounting discomfort. Harold turned to them with no anger in his gaze, only quiet disappointment and pain. 20 years have passed, and I thought things would be different today. But this evening, I came back to visit my granddaughter, Imani, a new hire at this hotel, and I witnessed the exact same treatment. He shook his head, voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know this young woman," he said, nodding toward Melissa, "but I recognize the look people here gave her. The look I once saw saying, 'You don't belong here.' It hurts just as much now as it did back then." Each of Harold's words struck at Dylan's pride, shattering his smug self-assurance. Tom Reynolds, too, felt his legs weaken. Harold's honest, heartfelt testimony dissolved their cold arrogance, revealing the deep-seated fear and bias beneath. Melissa met Harold's gaze with gratitude, understanding that his presence and his story were not only a moral boost, but living proof of the prejudice she faced. She gave him a quiet nod, expressing her sincere thanks and profound solidarity. Harold looked back at her, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I hope you'll do something different," he said gently. "I hope, with your help, this place will never make people like us suffer again." In that moment, Melissa realized that her fight had grown beyond her own struggle. This was a battle for people like Harold, those who'd stayed silent too long, those who endured prejudice and cold indifference simply because of their skin color. The lobby's atmosphere grew unbearably heavy. Dylan no longer dared meet Harold or Melissa's eyes. Shame had replaced his previous arrogance. Tom Reynolds had abandoned his intimidating stance. He stood motionless, avoiding everyone's gaze. Meanwhile, in the far corner, Loretta watched in silent awe, tears brimming in her eyes. Harold had voiced what she'd long felt but never dared say. In that instant, she knew tonight was more than a minor incident. It marked the beginning of the change the Fairline so desperately needed. Melissa drew a slow, steady breath, her expression now one of unwavering resolve rather than weariness or hurt. She understood that Harold had shown her the true purpose of her fight, not only to restore her own dignity, but to transform the hotel's entire culture, to uproot long-standing prejudice so no one else would endure the pain Harold had carried for 2 decades. Just as the air in the lobby hung thick with tension from Harold's gripping account, the Fairline's glass doors opened again. 2 sharply dressed men in suits strode in with purposeful, measured steps. They were William Langston and Julian Barrett, senior executives from Rowan Hospitality, instantly recognized by both Dylan and Tom. Their sudden arrival transformed Dylan's unease into outright panic. William Langston, a middle-aged man with salt-and-pepper hair and the discerning gaze of a seasoned investigator, approached the front desk. His sharp eyes swept the scene, quickly noting the charged atmosphere. Beside him stood Julian Barrett, younger but equally composed, his face betraying no hint of emotion. "What's going on here?" William asked, his voice brief but commanding, as he fixed Dylan with a steely stare. Dylan's attempt to remain calm failed utterly. His hands trembled uncontrollably. Linda Foster emerged from the office, trying to regain her composure, though her usual confidence was gone. Her voice quivered alarmingly as she addressed them. "Mr. Langston, Mr. Barrett, it's just a small misunderstanding. We're working to resolve it." Julian Barrett offered a faint, polite smile that carried no warmth. He produced a tablet from his suit pocket, opened an internal email, and read aloud in a cool, precise tone, "A misunderstanding? Then what about this email?" The Fairline received clear notice weeks ago that our CEO would be conducting a confidential inspection this week. Can you explain why none of the staff were informed, or is this your management style at this hotel? Linda went pale, her eyes darting to Dylan in a silent plea for support, but Dylan was far more flustered than she. He stammered in a weak, frightened voice, I don't know. I didn't receive any such notice." William Langston stepped closer, his gaze piercing as if probing Dylan's very thoughts. He spoke slowly, every word weighted with authority. "Didn't receive, or did you simply choose to ignore it, Dylan? That email was sent 2 weeks ago, expressly instructing all staff to treat every guest with absolute respect, especially if they arrive unannounced. That's exactly what happened with Ms. Melissa Warren, the head of our corporation. I trust you appreciate the gravity of this situation." At that, Dylan went ghostly white. He tried to protest further, but his throat tightened, and no words came out. All of Dylan and Linda's excuses, and their efforts to explain, crumbled beneath the undeniable truth laid bare before everyone. William continued, his tone unrelenting. "What's more disappointing is that this internal review was meant precisely to reassess our staff's conduct and ensure no one faces discrimination in our hotels. Yet here at the Fairline today, you have proven our concerns were not unfounded." Linda trembled, unable to raise her head, her fingers clenched together as though clutching at the last shreds of dignity. Dylan hung his head in despair. Tom Reynolds quietly stepped back a few paces, realizing that his role as security meant nothing, now that he, too, was swept up in these serious failings. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the lobby, as if everyone held their breath, awaiting the fallout from this revealed truth. Loretta, standing off to the side, watched with a composed but deeply moved expression. This was the moment she'd longed for. The moment when the painful, bitter truth would shatter the prejudice and discrimination that had long flourished here. Melissa said nothing, standing firm with a cold, resolute gaze fixed on Dylan and Linda. Words were no longer necessary. The truth itself was the most powerful testimony to all she had endured. William Langston then turned to her and offered a respectful nod. "Miss Warren, on behalf of Rowan Hospitality, I apologize for what you experienced here. I assure you, this will never happen again." At that moment, Melissa exhaled a long breath, feeling some of the weight she'd carried since arriving finally lift. But she knew this was only the beginning, the crucial first step toward uprooting the deep-seated issues at the Fairline Hotel. She spotted Harold's approving gaze from across the lobby, his eyes full of belief and gratitude. Melissa understood that her fight wasn't just about defending her own honor. It was about speaking up for everyone who'd silently endured discrimination and injustice like Harold once did. That, she realized, was the true power of the truth she had just revealed. Amid the suffocating hush that still clung to the lobby, a tentative, gentle footstep echoed from a shadowed corner near the front desk. Every pair of eyes snapped toward the sound to see a slender young woman approach, her hands trembling as she gripped her phone. This was Pamela Adams, a newcomer, barely a month into her internship. Her face was ashen with fear, but in her eyes flickered a fragile spark of courage, as though she were battling her own terror. I have something to say," Pamela stammered, her voice quavering yet clear enough to command everyone's attention. Dylan whipped around, shock and panic mingling in his expression. He'd never paid Pamela any mind before. Interns, to him, were invisible. Linda, still shaken from the earlier confrontation, looked up warily, as if sensing another storm was about to break. Pamela drew a steadying breath, trying to calm herself before speaking again. Her hands shook as she raised her phone. I recorded everything that happened here just now." Her words struck Dylan and Linda like a bolt of lightning, freezing them in utter dismay. Dylan took a threatening step forward, but his voice quivered with desperation. "Pamela, do you even realize what you're doing? You'll lose this job." Pamela bowed her head, her knuckles whitening as she gripped her phone, the fear in her eyes deepening. She hesitated. Then, from the back of the lobby, Loretta's calm yet decisive voice rang out, "Don't be afraid, Pamela. Hold on to the truth, even if it hurts them." Pamela looked up and saw Loretta offering her a genuine, encouraging smile. That small act of support steeled Pamela's resolve. She faced Dylan and Linda squarely, her tone firmer. "I can't stay silent any longer. I believe the truth matters more than my job. This is proof of what just happened here." Quickly, Pamela played the video on her phone and held it out to William Langston and Julian Barrett. The two executives watched in silence, their expressions growing graver with every passing second. Every cold, contemptuous word from Dylan, every suspicious glance from Linda, it was all captured in vivid detail. With the evidence undeniable, Pamela's recording became irrefutable proof of Dylan's, Linda's, and Tom's misconduct. Linda, now utterly unmoored, sputtered in panic, I didn't mean, it was all a misunderstanding." Julian Barrett cut her off with a voice as cold and sharp as a verdict. "This isn't a misunderstanding, Linda. This is discrimination, flatly opposed to every principle this hotel claims to uphold." William Langston turned to Pamela, his gaze softening. "Pamela, thank you for speaking up and providing this crucial evidence. We assure you there will be no repercussions for doing the right thing." Pamela nodded, relief flooding her face, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Meanwhile, Dylan sank into the chair behind the desk, his face blank, eyes staring at the lobby's polished floor. No excuses remained. Pamela's footage had laid bare his true nature, a petty power trip masked as authority. Linda stood frozen, casting a pleading look at Melissa. But Melissa remained unmoved, understanding that Linda was now confronting the inevitable consequences of her own choices. In the far corner, Loretta watched quietly, pride shimmering in her steady gaze. She looked at Pamela with warmth and admiration, proof that even the smallest voices can spark change when they dare to speak truth. Melissa stepped forward and offered Pamela a grateful nod. Pamela returned it with a relieved, heartfelt smile. She realized that her brave act did more than protect Melissa. It struck a blow against the culture of discrimination quietly tolerated here. The charged atmosphere gave way to a profound, expectant silence, a silence heavy with the promise of transformation. Thanks to Pamela's courage, Loretta's steadfast encouragement, and Harold's timely intervention, everyone at the Fairline Hotel was reminded that, no matter how painful, the truth can never be concealed forever. In the heavy silence still hanging over the lobby after Pamela's brave confession, William Langston turned calmly to Linda, his eyes firm yet heavy with profound disappointment. "Linda, effective immediately, you are suspended indefinitely pending an internal investigation," he said, his voice steady but authoritative. "We need to determine your responsibility in this regrettable incident." At his words, Linda's usual confidence vanished. She froze, her gaze empty and despairing. All the years she'd spent climbing the ranks, believing her cold precision made her untouchable, collapsed in that instant. She glanced at Melissa, no longer with suspicion but with a powerless, pleading look. At the same moment, Dylan, ashen with fear, trembled forward toward Loretta, the older woman he'd once ignored as invisible. His voice was small and contrite. "Miss Loretta, I'm sorry. I truly don't know why I acted that way. I wasn't thinking clearly." Loretta paused her mopping, straightened, and met Dylan's eyes without anger, but with stern resolve, as though addressing a child caught in an undeniable mistake. "Dylan, your problem wasn't a lapse in judgment. On the contrary, you thought all too clearly about what you were doing. You chose that behavior because deep down you believed some people aren't worthy of respect or courtesy based solely on their appearance." Dylan recoiled at Loretta's piercing words. He had no defense. She had exposed the ugly truth in his own heart, a truth he hadn't faced. He lowered his head, shoulders shaking, all trace of his former arrogance gone. Melissa stepped forward toward Dylan and Linda, her tone measured. No anger, only cold resolve. These were not unthinking mistakes, Dylan and Linda. Your actions today stemmed from deliberate choices, rooted in the deep prejudices you hold. It is those choices for which you now must answer. Linda tried to speak but found no words, her eyes on Melissa at last recognizing the true power of the unassuming woman she had scorned. Dylan likewise realized his remorse had come too late. His past contempt had not only harmed others but now destroyed his own prospects. William Langston spoke again, his voice emotionless but unmistakably clear. "Linda, Dylan, we cannot tolerate discrimination of any kind in any Rowan hospitality property. Every staff member here must understand that respect is our foremost and non-negotiable principle." Tom Reynolds, the imposing guard, quietly bowed his head, acknowledging that his own intimidation of Melissa had become an indelible stain he could no longer excuse. In that haunting hush, Melissa turned to Harold, who quietly watched it all with deep respect and gratitude. She knew his story had done more than reveal painful truths. It had awakened everyone who witnessed it. Melissa then looked to Pamela and Loretta, the two women whose courage and integrity had prevailed in the darkest moments. Her gaze toward them was warm and filled with faith. Pamela smiled, proud of her courageous choice. Loretta returned Melissa's look with profound satisfaction, knowing at last the truth she'd longed to see was laid bare. Finally, Melissa faced Linda and Dylan once more, her voice gentler but no less resolute. "I hope that after all you've seen today, you truly understand the grave consequences of your choices. This is not just a personal lesson. It's an opportunity for everyone here to reflect on themselves and change from within." The lobby's atmosphere grew denser with meaning. Everyone realized this was more than a simple incident. It was a clarion call to confront the prejudices buried in each of them, and a reminder of every individual's duty to foster a culture of respect and equality. Standing there quietly but with undeniable authority, Melissa knew she had achieved the day's most important goal. She had brought the truth to light, forcing those responsible for injustice to face the consequences of their own actions. And she understood that today marked a pivotal turning point in rebuilding a genuine culture of respect at the Fairline, one where no one would ever again dare to demean another's dignity. The next morning, just as dawn's first light streamed through the gleaming windows of Fairline's grandest conference room, every staff member assembled in silence, as if fully aware of the gravity of today's meeting. The room was hushed. No rustling, no side conversations, each face thoughtful in the wake of last night's events. At precisely 8 a.m., the double doors swung open. Melissa entered with quiet authority, followed by William Langston and Julian Barrett, their expressions grave and resolute. Every eye turned to her, the woman who, in a single night, had upended life at the Fairline so profoundly. Standing behind the podium, Melissa let her gaze sweep slowly over the room, full of understanding and determination. "I'm sure each of you knows why we're here today," she began, direct but composed. There was no anger in her tone, yet every word was chosen with laser-like precision. delivering a message none could dispute. What happened last night was not merely an individual lapse. It was a clear reflection of attitudes and a culture that have persisted far too long within this hotel, and I will not allow it to continue. She paused briefly, letting her words sink in before continuing with even greater force. Therefore, effective immediately, every Fairline employee, from senior management to interns, will participate in mandatory training on equality and anti-discrimination. This is not a routine course. It is an essential step toward rebuilding trust and ensuring that everyone here is treated fairly. A respectful lowering of heads rippled around the room as staff absorbed the seriousness in her voice. Dylan, seated at the far end, sat in thoughtful silence for the first time, realizing how much his own complacency had cost him. Melissa then turned her attention to Pamela, who sat quietly in the corner, visibly nervous. In our darkest moments, one young person showed us the courage to do what was right, despite overwhelming pressure. Pamela Adams, your choice to document the truth has given us the clarity we desperately needed. Therefore, I am appointing you as Special Assistant for Customer Service, Quality, and Compliance at the Fairline. Pamela looked up, surprise and deep pride lighting her eyes. She had no idea her small act of bravery would yield such recognition. Gentle applause began to fill the room, as everyone recognized not just a promotion for Pamela, but a powerful affirmation of courage and integrity. Raising her hand for quiet, Melissa then addressed Loretta Davis, who sat modestly at the back. Her tone softened with respect. And one more person. Someone who has worked quietly here for years, witnessed countless injustices, yet never lost her dignity. Loretta Davis, you embody the courage and respect I want every employee here to uphold. Loretta rose slowly, tears in her eyes, as the room turned to honor her with heartfelt applause. For the first time, she truly felt the significance of her silent dedication and her colleagues' gratitude. Melissa's voice rang out once more, resolute. I want everyone to understand. No person, guest or staff, deserves anything less than absolute respect and fairness. This hotel will no longer tolerate prejudice or contempt in any form. I don't expect instant transformation of everyone's beliefs, but I do demand that each of you take responsibility for your choices. Silence reigned in the conference room. Melissa's words left no room for ambiguity. Dylan bowed his head further, shame and resolve in his heart. Linda sat quietly in remorse, realizing she'd lost something far more precious than her job. She'd lost her colleagues' trust. Before adjourning, Melissa scanned the room one last time, eyes kindled with understanding and hope. I know change is never easy, but today marks a beginning. Remember, from this day forward, the Fairline will not only be a place of luxury, it will be a place where every person who walks through these doors is treated with dignity and unwavering respect. As Melissa stepped away from the podium, the room erupted in applause, not just in agreement, but as a resounding commitment by every Fairline team member to build a more equitable, humane workplace. In that moment, everyone understood that this was no ordinary meeting. It was a turning point, a declaration that injustice would find no refuge at the Fairline ever again. As the last round of applause died away in the conference room, Melissa quietly swept her gaze across the space one final time, as if imprinting this moment in her memory. She knew today was far from ordinary. It marked a historic turning point for the Fairline Hotel and everyone present. Before leaving, she walked slowly to the staff bulletin board by the main entrance, a spot everyone passed each day. From her jacket pocket, she withdrew a small white slip of paper and carefully pinned it to the board. It bore only a single, concise line, yet its meaning was profound enough to make anyone stop and reflect. Don't just train them to serve. Teach them to see the person. Melissa lingered there in silence, her eyes fixed on the message with thoughtful resolve. She understood that from this moment on, Fairline was entering a new chapter, one in which every employee would need to confront the deep-seated biases they had, whether unknowingly or deliberately, carried with them. No one spoke aloud, but at the sight of those few words, the entire staff realized their mission had changed. They were no longer merely providing service, but genuinely respecting the humanity of every guest. In the days that followed, Fairline's operations resumed as usual, but underneath it all an irreversible transformation had taken hold. The detached, prejudiced looks once common on employees' faces were replaced by mindfulness, depth, and empathy. Dylan, after days of quiet reflection, threw himself into the anti-discrimination workshops, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to rediscover his true values. Linda, though no longer on Fairline's payroll, continued to email Melissa with heartfelt apologies and promises to learn, grow, and never repeat her past mistakes. Pamela, meanwhile, stepped into her new role with newfound confidence and pride. Forever grateful to Loretta and Melissa, who showed her that courage isn't defined by age or experience, but by the willingness to stand up for truth and justice. Loretta herself carried on her work quietly, yet she now received genuine respect and gratitude from everyone around her. She knew that her years of steadfast, silent perseverance had not been in vain. High above, Melissa stood by the grand window on the hotel's top floor, gazing out at the city of Charleston bathed in morning light. She felt with absolute clarity that she had sparked something vital. Not merely a change in policies or procedures, but a profound shift in how people recognize one another's worth. She recalled her first day at Fairline, the skeptical glances, the cold remarks, the invisible pressure she endured. Now, all of that had fueled her resolve to keep fighting and striving to make the world around her a better place. From that lofty vantage point, Melissa could see each tiny figure moving along the streets below, each carrying their own story, value, and dignity. She knew her work was far from over. The struggle against entrenched prejudice would be long and challenging, but never had she been more certain that every small step mattered. A warm ray of sunlight broke through the glass and gently lit her face, as if affirming that she had done the right thing by refusing to back down or stay silent in the face of injustice. She smiled softly, her heart brimming with hope and determination for the journey ahead. Before she departed, Melissa glanced back at Fairline one more time. The hotel stood proud yet more humble than ever, a living emblem of dignity, justice, and the power of truth. In that moment, she understood that the real change was only beginning, and she was ready for the path that lay ahead, carrying her message forward. Don't just train them to serve. Teach them to see the person. The story of Melissa Warren and the Fairline Hotel offers us a powerful lesson in dignity, justice, and the strength of speaking out against prejudice. Sometimes silence wounds the most, and courage to speak up can transform even the oldest of institutions. What do you think about Melissa's actions and her final message? Don't just train them to serve. Teach them to see the person. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss our next inspiring tales. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.